And welcome into the locker room. Gerhard Mathangani, Chase Robinson here with you. A lot to talk about today, and we'll start with Alabama basketball. You know, they've got some big wins. They've lost some tough ones, though. It's the final week of the regular season. Next week's the SEC tournament. What's going through the minds of the Alabama Crimson Tide?
As of right now, they're starting to hear all that bubble talk, and they can't get away from it because this is the time of year where most of your novice fans, most of the fans on the outside start to pay attention to college basketball.
Right.
A lot of people don't do that as much in November and December and early January, but here in February and in March, that's when all that talk starts to occur. Bama's 17-11, 8-8 in the SEC. So they're right there in the middle of it, and they have a big game against Arkansas for senior night, and then a big game against Georgia, another bubble team. And I think if they win those two games, they can put a firm footing on at least a bid, at least an at-large bid. And then, if they win a couple of games in the SEC tournament, they can get themselves into it. But as of right now, it's just like Avery Johnson says, they don't do well when they think long-term. They just need to think game by game. I think if they do that for these next two games and they have a strong showing in the SEC tournament, they'll be right where they want to be in the big dance.
For the SEC tournament, you know, we've seen them beat Texas A&M, beat Florida, those kind of big teams. When they get into the SEC tournament, how do you think they'll all play out? Because then they've lost, you know, some to Mississippi State and those type teams. Yeah,
it's interesting because we haven't seen this team in a kind of quote-unquote big game, all eyes on them. And the first time we'll see it is at the SEC tournament. But they have responded, like you said, in some of the bigger games against some of the top teams. Texas A&M is going to win the SEC. They beat Texas A&M at home. Teams like Arkansas is a very, very good team. A team like Georgia will give them a strong run on Saturday. I just think that stuff is willing to be played out. But I'm not going to say at this point they can't win those games because they can and they have.
Well, let's talk about the Jacksonville State Gamecocks now. Not quite the season they wanted to have this year. Another one of those seasons for JSU.
Right. It's another 8-23 year, and for Coach James Green and the Gamecocks, it just feels as of right now it's a lot of static. There's just no moving forward. Over the last 3 or 4 years. This year, though, they did have a lot of injuries. Malcolm Drumright was hurt. They had a freshman that was hurt. They had to call on a lot of different guys. And so this is the year this is one of those years they couldn't afford to have so many bad things happen, and then bad things happen during the course of the season. They lose 8 straight to close out the year, 8-23 overall, I think 4 games or 5 games in the conference. And it's OVC's a basketball conference, so you have to stay really competitive just to be in the middle, and much less to be at the top with some of the Belmonts and the Tennessee States and Tennessee Techs of the world. It's a rough go, and they just had a rough season, and they'll just have to rebuild, and hopefully they can. We'll see what they do moving forward. They have a nice facility now to recruit to at Pete Matthews Coliseum. They played in that gym for the first time this year, so hopefully some newfound energy will enter the building, but obviously just a really down year for Coach James Green and the Gamecocks.
Next, one of those SEC teams, the Auburn Tigers. Again, they've had big wins. They beat Alabama. They beat Kentucky. But they've also lost some of these games too. Talk about them as they finish up the last week and head into the tournament. Yeah,
Bruce Pearl and his crew it's been such an up and down. If you can just do a roller coaster of a season, it's their season. I mean, they beat Kentucky, who might go to the Sweet 16 or the Elite 8. And they've also, they also beat Tennessee after scoring 45 points in the previous game. And so they'll score 90 points one game, they'll score, 30, 40 something points the other game. They had Kareem Canty, who just all of a sudden left the team. Simeon Bowers is all kinds of trouble, and they can't really ever get that they haven't had a 4-game stretch where they look the same from game 1 to game 4 and a little bit better. They look way good, they look not so good. And that's the kind of year it's been for Bruce Pearl and this group, and they obviously won't make the big dance, and they can have maybe another run like they did a couple of years ago in the SEC tournament where they made it all the way to the semifinals and they were shocking everybody. I don't see it, but it can happen. But I think everything from right now, from Bruce Pearl's perspective, is to end this year as strongly as you can and build for next season.
All right, let's move over to high school basketball now. I know you've been over in Birmingham this week covering those teams. Let's start with the Spring Garden girls. They defeated Keith on Monday, who beat them in the state championship last year. They
Right.
got some redemption, and they'll be playing for another state championship.
Yeah, they wanted Keith, and Keith came out of the Central Regional, and the way that the brackets rolled out this year, the Northeast champion met the Central champion. So they had their eye on Montgomery as soon as they won the regional championship because they wanted the team that beat them in Class 1A. And I don't want to jinx them because they still have the state championship game to play, and they will play on Thursday. But they got over the team that was the favorite to go back and win it. Because
Right.
Keith was 31-2 going into that game, widely considered the best team in Class 1A, the defending state champions, and Spring Garden got their revenge. And they did so in dominating fashion. I mean, they won 50-34, held a good scoring team to 34 points. And so I think they've done what they're supposed to do. It's kind of like when Alabama, beat Michigan State in that in that first game. It almost seemed destined that they would beat Clemson. I just think they've done what they're supposed to do. Obviously, there's a lot more to go, and they'll still have 32 minutes of basketball to settle it out. But as of right now, they beat the monster they needed to beat to get that state championship they want.
Well, here's Coach Austin after that game on Monday against Keith.
Couldn't sit back and take punches. We had to come out early and throw punches, and I thought our girls did a great job of the intensity. They showed me some real want today, some more want. They really wanted this, and I'm proud for them.
Another one of our local teams picked up a win on Monday, and that's the Sacred Heart Cardinals. We've been talking about them all season,
Right.
playing for another state championship.
Yeah, and they got a big scare out of Keith,
Yeah.
and the game was really called tight. And it's what we've been talking about all year, and really the past 2 or 3 years with this team is they can't really get in foul trouble because they're not as deep as maybe like a team like Mountain Brook,
Right.
who plays 10 to 12 players. But the thing with Sacred Heart that really impressed me is they were down by 5 points about 3 minutes to go. When's the last time they were tested like that in a game in Class 1A? I mean, they've played teams like Anniston and the county championship. They've played teams like Spain Park and Gadsden City, but they rarely see that in Class 1A. Keith gave them everything, and the best player on the floor is probably Keith's player, John Petway, the cousin to Antoine Petway, former Alabama player, former JSU assistant coach, and now with Coach Avery Johnson. But what Sacred Heart did, to me, impressed me the most was they got in foul trouble. They got all the adversity early in the game, clawed back late in the game, and were able to come away with the win. That's the resiliency of a champion.
Right.
Teams that know how to win games find ways to win those kind of games.
Right.
They were in the double bonus in the first half. They were shooting free throws, Keith was, in the first quarter. 2 free throws. I mean, they were already at 10 points. So they found themselves in adversity early, adversity late, and the championship teams find ways to win, and that's what they did. They'll still have another game to play. They have to beat Georgiana, who's 30-1 on the season, and they'll play them in the championship game on Thursday. But we'll see how it goes. But I was really, really impressed with their semifinal win.
And here is Coach Raphael Graves after their big win on Monday.
See hard work and just to see them work extremely hard and discipline, and fight together and stuff like that. To put that on display down here at the BJCC in Birmingham, I think that's a tremendous thing on their part. I'm the coach and they're the players, and they did really well. I'm proud of them.
And Garrett, we have a couple other teams playing over in Birmingham this week, and a great showing from East Alabama in Birmingham this week for the championships.
Yeah, it's been really interesting to find out and to see who wins where and how everybody fares out. A team like Childersburg is back in it. And then you have a lot of the teams that we've seen over the course of the last few months. A team like Spain Park. We've seen them twice. They were in our Holiday Hoops Challenge, and we saw them at the Northeast Regional. We'll see how they match up if they play Hoover for the state championship. That'll be another interesting matchup. And I just think it's always really interesting at this time of year to find out who wins these kind of one-game seasons, so to speak. And, obviously best of luck to Spring Garden, who will play Linden, and Sacred Heart, who will play Georgiana, and the Anniston girls, who will play, obviously, they play tonight as we shoot, and hopefully they'll play again on Saturday. It's a really fun time of year for high school basketball, and we obviously wish the best for our local teams.
That's right. Good luck to all those teams. We're going to grab a timeout. When we come back, we'll talk some college football, spring training. So stay with us here in the locker room. Back here in the locker room, and let's talk some college football now. Spring training beginning this week for the Jacksonville State Gamecocks. They lost in the national championship this past year. What are y'all looking for this spring for Jacksonville State?
Fire. A lot of fire and intensity, and some of the things that built from their second-round loss last year that propelled them into the FCS championship game. But this spring training is a lot different. I mean, Eli Jenkins is out with a shoulder injury. They're replacing 29 seniors. and they're getting a lot of different guys that are filling in spots. I mean, right now, their quarterback position, they're really looking for the third or fourth string quarterback because they're hoping that the guys that they sign in this offseason are going to be the number 2 and number 3. So for a lot of what JSU this spring specifically, it's getting a lot of the guys that didn't get a lot of playing time last year, getting them what they call quote-unquote varsity reps this year. Make sure that they're ready and maybe adding to the depth of some of the guys that might be playing coming up this fall.
You know, I know the coaches will get a lot of answers this spring. I'm not sure as fans if they'll get any answers till next year when they take the field, because that's the big question to me is, can they sustain this success? Can they build off the disappointment from last year? Will they be hungry and motivated, and all those intangible things that go into winning a championship? Definitely don't want to be a one-hit wonder and pop up and do great, then kind of fade away for a while. And I think they've got a lot of key things in place, though, to really go on a nice little run here, though.
Right.
Well, here's Coach John Gross after day 1 of spring training.
It goes back to fundamentals. You know, we got a lot of guys that's got an opportunity to really redshirted last year. Was not in the meetings last year. They don't have an opportunity to play, and you want to see what those guys can do and how well they can block and tackle. And we got some new guys in to break it. You want to see what they're about and see their skill set. So, and it's everybody trying to get better each and every day fundamentally. Our goal is to be a great fundamental football team, and the game never gets away from blocking and tackling. So, that's part of it. And like I said, you can't tell a whole lot in headgear right now. We get those pads on Saturday, and we want to be physical, so we'll toughen us up a little bit and be physical.
The Auburn Tigers also beginning spring practice this week. After not quite the season they wanted to have, what are they looking for this spring?
Well, I think there's a chip on their shoulder, obviously, and Coach Gus Malzahn said those exact words. And I think last year the downfall started at quarterback. And this year he made it pretty well known from the jump that the quarterback position will be a battle. It'll be a battle between everybody. And Jeremy Johnson will get the same look as John Franklin III, will get the same look as Sean White. And we'll see how they handle the quarterback situation. But I think a lot of lessons were learned from last year. There's also a lot of new faces on the staff. You got new defensive coordinator Kevin Steele. You have Cody Burns back in the fold. So I think for a lot of Auburn, it's getting used to the new look of what they have, and we'll see where it goes from there.
Yeah, I think kind of like JSU, Auburn's going to be very hungry for a different kind of reason. They're going to be very motivated to show that last year was kind of an aberration. And Auburn typically does well in these kind of years, as has been well documented when you don't expect much out of them. But I think the big story for Auburn is the coaching changes and Gus Malzahn kind of saying, you know what, if I'm going to be on the hot seat, and if the pressure's going to be on me this year, I'm going to do it with my guys. And I think that's what he did. And it'll be real interesting to see how the players adapt to these new coaches, especially the wide receiver group, the new kids that Damian Craig recruited. I think you got some really good coaches, though. And if Malzahn is able to have a good year and survive, I don't think Auburn will miss a beat in recruiting. I think they're better positioned recruiting-wise with guys like Travis Williams, guys like Herb Hand, Kevin Steele, Wesley McGriff, those type guys who are very good recruiters. Thing is, you got to keep your job in order to keep recruiting.
Right.
And here is Coach Gus Malzahn following the first week of spring training.
It's a new year, and from a coach's standpoint, especially a head coach's standpoint, you evaluate the things that, from last year that you need to improve on. And we know what they are, and we're going to go out there and redeem ourselves.
And the Alabama Crimson Tide, they'll begin spring practice next week. But what are some things for them position-wise that they're going to be looking for this spring?
Obviously, quarterback. The quarterback was a situation all the way to the Ole Miss game this year. So it's just so hard to see with Alabama. It's just like, okay, well, where's the next position? But obviously for them, I think the key will be running back. Derrick Henry gone, Kenyon Drake gone. I think that will be the big factor for Alabama, is the fact they're losing both those guys.
Right.
The years where they lost Eddie Lacy, Trey Richardson, Mark Ingram, it was one guy to the NFL and one guy to the NFL, another guy to the NFL. Now it's two guys, two of the main guys that were the catalyst for this team. And then you can have all the Calvin Ridleys all you want to, but if you have to have a quarterback back there that can make some plays. But I think it starts and ends with them at that running back position.
To me, I've said this so many times in the Saban era, to me it is, can Saban and his coaches keep these kids hungry? because it's easy to be hungry when you were humiliated like Auburn was in many games last year and finished a disappointing 7-6 after being picked to win the conference. That's one thing to be hungry that way.
Right.
But when you've got another trophy and another ring and all the attention that goes with it, keeping those guys hungry, that's a different scenario. But the thing that Saban does so well, and last year was a great example. Yeah, Alabama struggled at quarterback, but it was a manageable situation. Auburn completely missed at quarterback. And really, you know, I know that Alabama wins the mythical national championship in recruiting a lot, but to me, there's not a lot of difference between who finishes first and who finishes 15th. They're all good. Enough good players are there.
Yeah.
It's player development and how you coach them up every year.
Right.
Auburn, you see what they did with their quarterback situation last year, how they missed. If last year is a miss for Alabama, that's not a bad miss. They still managed it and won a national championship.
Yeah.
It'll be interesting to see, and we'll keep you updated all throughout spring training here on The Locker Room. We're going to grab another timeout. When we come back, it's the Locker Room Roundtable, so stay with us. Back here in the locker room, and it's time for the Locker Room Roundtable. And, you know, Saturday night, Steph Curry taking on Oklahoma City. What a shot to end the game. Could this put him as the greatest player of all time?
Okay, I'll set a lot of kids that are, I know we have a lot of fans of the show that are south of 16 years old. Absolutely not. He's not the greatest player of all time. He might go down as one of the greatest shooters of all time, and you could probably make an argument right now that he is the greatest shooter. And I'm sure Big Oscar Robertson and other people will disagree. But what he's doing right now, he's changing basketball. I mean, you can go to any Little League game, you can go to any high school basketball game. It's changed the game, and it's changed the way teams play, and the Warriors have changed the way the teams play. He will be in the conversation later, but he's got to win more championships, and he's got to continue this on a trajectory. Maybe not the trajectory that he's going right now, because it's just the sky's the limit. But no, he's not the greatest player of all time right now, but he can be. He's got that wherewithal. He's got the makeup, and what he's doing right now is just unbelievable. I just sit back and watch it and enjoy it, and enjoy that you're watching a portion of NBA basketball we've never seen before.
It's the greatest NBA story of my lifetime. You know, here's a kid, yeah, he's Del Curry's son, so he's got NBA pedigree in the family, but he didn't go to a major college.
Right.
He was in the league for 4 or 5 years before we knew who he was. He works as hard or harder than any other player. He has found him a niche that nobody's ever found before, and that is, I heard a coach tell me before that if you can get so good at your handles, where you handle the ball so well that it's literally like you're running around on the court with the ball, you can get by anybody, and you can get by a lot of superior athletes, and that's how good his handles are. So that's number one. Number two, he's developed enough strength to where he can shoot deep without affecting his mechanics. And he practices enough to where his accuracy is very high. You throw all of that together, and then the fourth thing that makes him really special is he plays so loose and free and so confident.
Right.
All of those things together make him the most unique NBA story I've ever seen.
Well, let's stick with basketball here. March Madness will be cranking up here in just a little bit. I know there's always some shakeups, some big upsets. What are some things y'all are looking forward to about March Madness as we begin?
To me, I was talking with someone earlier today here at the station about this. This is a wide open field this year. You know, even looking at projected seedings and things, the top seeds in the different regions, I think the 3rd and 4th and 5th seeds I've seen projected are just as good as the 1 seed.
Yeah.
So to me, it's always kind of wide open. But to me, it's really wide open. I think when we get into that round of Sweet 16 and get some of those, get whatever upsets we're going to have, get those out of the way, get the pretenders out of the way, I think we're in for some pretty good basketball games.
Absolutely. We've seen just how much changeover there's been in the #1 spot. How many teams have held the #1 spot in the rankings, whether it's the coaches poll or the AP poll, all season long? And it makes me think, and I'm not going to say it just yet until the brackets come out, but it makes me think this might be the year. We've knocked on that door, we've tapped on it every year for maybe the last 10 years, and we've seen some very, very close games. This might be the year of 16 beats to 1, and it would not be surprising to me. It would be surprising when you take it against the history of the tournament, but it wouldn't be surprising this year just with the number of #1 teams and the craziness that always comes with March Madness.
Well, Major League Baseball spring training has begun, and there's a big question mark next to the Atlanta Braves.
95 losses last year. I mean, there's going to be a whole lot of questions, but they've retooled this entire roster. I mean, they're shipping guys in and out, and they're getting minor league guys. And one of the guys that they got when they dealt Shelby Miller is Dansby Swanson out of Vanderbilt. He's not on the major league roster yet, but I would not be surprised if by the end of this season, maybe next season, he's on that major league roster. He could be a huge, huge pickup for them. Freddie Freeman, will his wrist stay healthy enough? And then also with Nick Markakis, will he stay healthy enough? I think he had a full season to recover from that neck surgery that he had. I think health and then the young pitchers will be the keys for the Braves this year. I don't expect them to lose 95 games again, but they'll be back getting to where they'll be back on the precipice of the division championship.
Personally, I like what they've done. I thought what Frank Wren did at the end there, giving those big contracts to he's B.J. Upton to me.
Yeah.
And Dan Ugly and what happened there. All these big contracts that were just big millstones around their neck. They just decided, it's kind of like you got two options in baseball. You can go that route, that free agent route, sign those big contracts. But to me, there's not a lot of evidence that works nowadays.
Right.
I like the idea of beefing up your farm system the way the Braves got good originally in the 90s.
Right.
Having lower contracts, having a lot of assets to trade if you need to make a late season deal, a la Fred McGriff. And team chemistry to me is better when you don't have these big, huge contracts and these big, huge egos in the locker room. So I'm with Gerhard. I think they're going to be better this year. I think the Braves are positioned. They're going to miss on a few, but they've got so many assets they've traded for that there's no way they can miss on all.
Right.
They're going to be really fun to watch the next several years, and the pitching they've stocked there, probably the best in franchise history. No doubt.
Yeah.
Well, look forward to see that. Let's move over to NASCAR now. Jimmie Johnson with a win at Atlanta this week, his 16th win at Atlanta, which ties with Dale Earnhardt. Could he be one of the greatest drivers in NASCAR?
Absolutely, and I think that if he can get back into the chase this year, and then if he can win the chase this year, or even just get back into that Final Four, you look at the last decade, and he's had a Michael Jordan-like 90s for him. That's what he would have over the last 10 years. And especially now with guys, he's kind of that transition between the guys like Dale Earnhardt Sr. and Jeff Gordon who bridge that new school to the newer school. He's kind of that next guy, him and Dale Earnhardt Jr., but he's got the titles that Dale Earnhardt Jr. does not have. And so I think with that alone, his competitive fire, his competitive drive, and the fact that he can do it over a long period of time, it can put him right up there with the top. But NASCAR is momentum, and so he needs to take Atlanta and go into the next one and go into the next one. We'll see where he is at the end of the year.
And NASCAR is also luck. And he didn't have much of it last year. He had a ton of it there for what seemed like 4 or 5 years in a row. So he's kind of due in that regard. As good a driver and as good a team as he is, to have such bad luck last year, you'd think he's going to rebound and be a strong contender this year. But I think it's kind of wide open. I think the window for Jimmie Johnson is not wide open. I think it's a window is there, but he wants to get that that 8th championship, and he's not getting any younger. And you saw what happened with Jeff Gordon as he aged, and what happens with all of them as they age. And there's a ton of them coming up behind him. So I think he is the story to watch. But, I mean, you got a lot of other drivers who are going to be strong contenders this year.
All right, well, that'll do it for this week's edition of The Locker Room. If you want to check it out again, though, there's several other times you can do that. There you see the times on Thursday and Friday. And then, of course, you can log on to TV24.tv on demand and watch the show, as well as on Facebook and Twitter. Thanks so much for joining us this week. We will be back here next week in The Locker Room.